My name is Philip Mind. I'm the Director of Digital Technology and Innovation at UK Finance. And in today's session, we will discuss the future of fraud and digital identity verification in the UK. I'm delighted to welcome a panel of experts. I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion this morning. So I'm joined by Paul, Frank and Tony. I'll let them introduce themselves properly to you in a moment. But before I do that, I have a number of housekeeping points. So today's webinar will last for 1 hour. It will be a panel discussion, but also we'd welcome any questions that you have as the audience. We will talk through our discussion points and then we'll sort of start to take your questions towards the end of the session. So now I'm going to ask each of the panelists in turn to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Frank, please.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Philip, for introducing us all. Myself, Frank Martins, I'm an international senior sales manager for ID Now. For those that don't know ID Now, we are a German business that started in 2014, one of the pioneers in digital identity verification. We have offices in Germany, here in the UK, in France, and we specialize in KYC, in remote identification, work with the likes of many of the most important banks in the continent. And that's pretty much it for me.
Thanks, Frank, and thanks for giving a few opening remarks about ID Now, who are kindly sponsoring today's webinar. So, Paul, would you introduce yourself, please?
Well, thanks, Philip. Morning, everyone. My name's Paul Stratton. I am the director and a lead trainer, or rather the only trainer at the Fraud Nerd Limited, which is my new business. Prior to that, I spent nearly 26 years in the public sector, 22 years within the police, where I was involved with fraud and economic crime as an investigator, as a detective, and then more recently within local authority as a fraud and corruption specialist, designing strategy and involved in everything internal fraud and corruption. Thanks, Philip.
Thanks, Paul. Tony.
Yeah, thanks. So my name's Tony Sowles. I'm the Chief Product Officer at We Fight Fraud. I have previously been dubbed Britain's greatest fraudster. It's not something I'm at all proud of. I was young and foolish when I got involved in a life of crime. A few years ago, I founded We Fight Fraud alongside my business partner, Adam Boom. And today we teach businesses about the human element of fraud. We start generally by penetration testing a business, and then that quickly moves into training, and we just kind of, recently we're more getting into awareness because the profile of We Fight Fraud is rising, and so we feel we have a voice, and we're able to just kind of articulate the threats in a different way to most. So yeah, that's us.
So thanks, Tony, Paul, Frank. We've got some really interesting perspectives. Let me just set the scene and then we'll get into a discussion. So on the one hand, we're going to be talking about fraud, which some have characterized as an epidemic, but let me just give you a few of the statistics because they are shocking. So 1.2 billion stolen in fraud in 2022. That's UK Finance statistic. I mean, fortunately, that is down on 2021 by 8%, but still a significant value amount. 3 million cases. That's extraordinary. 3 million cases. In terms of unauthorized and authorized fraud, so 726 million in unauthorized fraud, and authorized push payment fraud 485 million. So those figures are down a little from 2021, and good news, although it's still a figure that is way too high and a figure of considerable industry concern, is the APP fraud figure has come down about 100 million from the previous year. there's an awful lot of work being done across industry and a great deal of investment in preventing and fighting fraud, both from a kind of technology perspective. So we have strong customer authentication, confirmation of payee, both of which have had some impact. And we have within UK Finance, the Take 5 campaign. I mean, Tony's already referenced the importance of awareness, and the DCPCU, which is working cross-sector to tackle and prevent fraud. So a lot of cross-sector action. Alongside that, I should just say a little bit about digital identity, because I think we'll talk about fraud, but then we'll explore how digital identity can help assist in preventing and fighting fraud. So we have a data protection digital information bill in Parliament at the moment that will be in law in the spring, we anticipate, which will create a level playing field between digital identity and analog paper forms of identities, and give the market an opportunity to develop reusable kind of digital identity, which could play an important role in tackling fraud. And we'll sort of get into the tech later in the discussion, but we'll start with fraud, and I want to start with you, Tony, because give your perspective. I mean, fraud is, one of the most significant crimes now in the UK. How do fraudsters manage to commit the crimes?
I guess that since the internet, right, what's happened is that criminals have got more tools. The data streams that are available to them are much more available than ever before. Like if you think when I was a criminal, you could get in someone's information was quite difficult. It wasn't the process that it is now with Telegram groups and, the dark web and all of these places where criminals harvest information. So it's a lot easier now to commit it than it ever was before. So I think that as society as well, there's part of society that's quite poor, and that also plays into the need for bits and pieces. Kids see stuff on social media, they end up getting involved in doing deetsing because they don't even realize the consequences of it. They just want to get to that little bit of item that they're seeing the others do. And I think that that's a massive part of why we see the numbers that we do nowadays.
Thanks. So if you like, kind of tech has driven a new form of fraud has a long history, but actually as tech and accessibility of tech and data and our lives have moved online, and that's offered the opportunity for criminals. Paul, do you agree with that? And anything to add?
No, I mean, Tony's articulated it perfectly. It's exactly how it is. It's because it's easy. Look at the risks of fraud. If I was to burgle someone's house or steal from a shop or rob someone on the street, the risks are enormous, aren't they? Whereas with fraud, certainly with cybercrime, which cybercrime is about 80-90% of all fraud, isn't it? But yeah, it's so easy for people to say the tools are there. But also, I think our collective will, there's a lot of people on this call who all they want to do is fight fraud. That's it. But I think collectively from the government and the recent strategy, if burglary was as significant a problem as fraud, you'd be seeing an awful lot more on the television about it on peak hours rather than just during the day when other people don't see it. You'd be seeing an awful lot more. So it lends itself to the anonymity, but it's unfortunately, it's just easy. All you need is a laptop and a Starbucks Wi-Fi and you're away, sadly.
I'm going to ask you about how policing has responded to the challenge of fraud. But before I do so, we do have a couple of poll questions, and I think it's timely to ask the first question, which is, so you should see this, but of all the crimes in the UK, how much do you think that fraud currently accounts for? So be really interested in your answers to that, and we'll sort of come back and we'll reflect on that in a moment. But Paul, how's policing responded to the growth in fraud?
This is where I'm going to sound horrifically cynical. It hasn't. And I say that, not that when if a job came onto my desk, I assure everyone listening to this, whatever police officer gets it, it's going to be investigated, and it's going to be investigated well. That's the first thing I'd say. However, there's still, and it's a cultural thing with fraud, it's still seen as this white collar crime. That phrase still pops up. It's still seen as a business crime with a lot of senior officers. And until we sort of accept that it's not just that, it's about harm. It's about emotional harm as well, obviously financial harm. But just to promote Merseyside Police, who I came from, really, they moved a few years ago to what's called sort of a harm matrix. They moved away from only accepting jobs that were over £1 million in loss. Some police forces won't accept things unless it's over £1 million in loss. Their fraud team, that is, their trained fraud team. But Merseyside moved to the harm, so they looked at everything. They didn't just look at the money. They looked at the relative and the comparable harm it caused. And I think if we can move towards that, if we can move towards the actual harm it causes and not just see the financial element, I think we're doing well. But we are reacting, but with terrorism, with drug dealing, with county lines, with exploitation, there's a lot of priorities there for the police, a lot of priorities, sadly.
Absolutely. And well, look, we've got the poll results, and actually that well, thanks to 114 people answered, so that's great to have that engagement. Look, and most of you are right. 40% of all crimes in the UK are accounted for by fraud, which is quite a shocking statistic. So to just Frank, Paul, well, Frank first, and any kind of reaction to that statistic? And it's actually really interesting. We either have a very informed audience or an audience that, the public perception is already kind of a sense that fraud is a really significant crime in the UK. So any thoughts about that, Frank?
Well, I think part to blame is the regulation in the UK is a bit different than the rest of European countries. It's a bit more lousy. It allows just data checks, so based on information given for the individual to open an account, whereas in most places in Europe you need the document check, the selfie biometrics, and you have like a preset how can I say, a preset journey of modules to take part. The UK is like the risk-based approach allows the financial institution or the gambling operator to kind of choose their own way based on risk. And another point, I think, Philip, is the documents in the UK. The UK driving license, the security features, they're just not enough. And you can buy a fraudulent produced document online, even pay by credit card, which is absurd. So, in Europe, they're moving more to, gearing the countries more to issue biometric cards, and it just adds to the security. Of course, you're always going to have the sophisticated fraud. Myself being in the industry, I used to be in payments and now in identity. I've seen documents with chip going through a 3-light scanner, those ones in police forces, used by police forces and in airports. I've seen fraudulent documents going through with a green light, because the criminals, they have the machine to produce the documents, they have the ink, they have all the materials. So, when we do the check online, just using visible light from the mobile device, it becomes even more difficult.
Tony, any comments on that? The ability of fraudsters to fraudulently produce the kind of documents that we rely on to assert our identity, driving license, passports, so forth?
Yeah, I mean, all of those things have always been in play, for since the dawn of documents. There's been security features in a document, right, in all different ways. And over the years, we've learned. I always think of it like a car. when cars first come out, they didn't have a roof, they didn't have doors. You had to have someone wind the front up at the beginning, someone walk in front to make the car go slower, all these evolutions. And then all of a sudden, as people started to steal the cars, we realized we have to add doors, a roof, locks, steering locks, more security, all these things that we have to wrap around it, because the criminals get more audacious. Their stuff is easily obtained, like Frank says. Yeah, you can buy this stuff online. You know, if you look at the company's house problem, it's really easy to open up a company. You know, I can now start getting this stuff delivered to where I want it to, all the right machinery, all the right ink, like Frank says. You know, it's only getting a template. Those templates will be available. It's all layered. Everything's layered, normally in Coral Draw. Like, this stuff has been around. It's just evolutions of the previous stuff, you know. And so tech will always get good at detecting this stuff, but the criminals, anything that's real, criminals can reproduce. You know, no matter where it is, no matter what it is, they'll reproduce it somewhere. You know, some of the fakes, think about some of the knockoff stuff that we see. There's just, you can't tell the difference on some of this stuff. So, you know, I think that we've got a long way to go, and we just have to do more and more of this stuff. Has to be more and more implemented across the board. You know, it all has to, all of the ones, you know, you have to find the fake ones first and add them to the systems as well. You know, that's got to be a process that's allowed to happen for businesses, to be able to store those databases of already previous ones that are really good, that are not being used or but are for sale on dark marketplaces, things like that.
Yeah, so I want to sort of move the discussion a bit into how the authorities are responding to the fraud problem. So we have a UK fraud strategy funded with kind of extra resources. We have, you know, National Fraud Squad, specialist investigators, and we'll come on a bit to talk about the role of tech, and actually I mean, which gives us kind of opportunities, but also creates new threats as well. So it's kind of double-edged. But Paul, in terms of the UK fraud strategy, what are your kind of observations on it? A step in the right direction?
Yes, in the broadest sense. I'm afraid, again, I sound awful cynical this morning, don't I? In the broadest sense, there's a lot of headlines there without detail, sadly. 400 new dedicated officers. I don't know where these 400 are coming from. I'm involved I train and coach the counter fraud apprentices for other government agencies. Are they talking about those, or are they talking about a fresh batch of new ones? I think there are. It does, of course, any kind of strategy, as it were. But it hasn't been communicated. We know about it because we're in the profession. But something like this, if I asked even my wife about it, she only know about it because probably she'd heard me maybe moan about it a little bit. But if you ask anybody else on the street, they're not going to understand this. And I think there's a lack of education there. I think it's all very well, but I think it'll just gather cyber dust for the majority. But it is a step in the right direction. Of course, it is extra. I think it talks about 100 million. Well, look at the figures we've just talked about losing there. We're losing billions a year. 100 million to what, over 40 plus police forces, you know, regional forces as well. How are they going to share that money? How are we, you know, is it going to be ring fenced, or are they going to lose it if they don't spend it? Is it going to be on a training for current officers? Because that's where we fall down a little bit as well. You know, you get your detective's badge in the police and then you just go and do your job as you should, and we do it well. We really do. The police do it really well. But that constant, like these sessions, are we constantly developing, as Tony and Frank said, we developing the officers and the investigators to respond to new threats. How are we sharing that? So I could go on. I think what's quite disappointing is I think it's still quite fragmented. It talks about this new fraud squad, this new fraud squad. In the UK, we've just got the Public Sector Fraud Authority as well. We've still got the National Crime Agency. We've got there's an awful lot of agencies working towards, as with UK Finance and other things. Yeah, I don't think it's centralised enough, and it needs to be pushed from a centre. So it has a brand itself. Fraud needs a brand itself to really make people listen. But yes, I do. the cynical side of me says, yeah, I want to see the detail, see how it's implemented. But you know what? It's something. If it means it's a starting point, I'll accept that. But yeah, let's see how it goes.
Yeah, I think a couple of really important points that you've made. I mean, the answer to having different agencies is to have that coordination. And I know that UK Finance is, plays a really important role, kind of bringing different actors together to fight economic crime. And indeed, actually, we see a need for even more kind of coordination across sectors. One of our kind of key messages is the importance of tackling fraud, at source, on the different kind of platforms where it emerges with the sort of tech and the telco sectors. So that is something that we are working really hard on. I want to start to talk about the tech, because that's where I have the personal interest. So I just wanted to bring Frank in, really, just to say a little bit more about ID Now and some of the tech that your company is developing to help kind of combat fraud. And then I think we'll just kind of get into a discussion more about the role of technology, both as kind of opportunity, but also increasing the risk threat. So, but Frank, OneID.
Just before that, Philip, just to talk a little bit about the UK fraud strategy, just a little pinch from my side. As Paul said, it is, a step in the right direction, but technology alone, while pivotal, is just one piece of the puzzle. True innovation will require robust frameworks that push for proper standards that will link catalyzing transformative improvements, from within the sector. So there's the need to have a proper cohesive standards in the realm of continuous authentication, especially for anti-fraud purposes, linking, the end user in the center of the authentication process. So when we talk about eIDAS 2.0 and the digital identity, reusable identity, they don't talk about there's no standards, there's not like proper regulation moving in the direction of where it needs to go. They talk about authenticating the device, not the end user. And as Tony knows very well, fraudsters, they don't like showing their faces. They can use document, they can get a third, like a student, say, look, we're going to open an account, we give you 100 quid, then we're going to use it, you're going to go back to Brazil, Turkey, Korea, well, you don't care. And they use it as meal. So one thing we know is that fraudsters do not like to show their face. They will never show their face. They're going to get someone else, they're going to try a mask. And that's where we come. What we have developed, we've been in the industry since 2014, one of the true pioneers, practically the only identity vendor that has got a grant from the European Investment Bank, which is owned by the European member states. So that puts us in a different position because we work together with regulators. We got our platform accredited by the FCA, by all the regulators in Europe. And again, it's still too little, too late. We're very, the sector is very document centric, and the document is the weakest point in the whole journey. So you have document, you want to prove it's state issued, and you want to link to the end user. How we do that is by asking the applicant for that particular account service to take a biometric selfie with the best liveness detection in the industry. Now, even if the document is not authentic and it's very difficult to verify online, when it comes to biometrics and the liveness detection, that's where we usually get them. And this has to be continuous. There's a huge problem in the industry, Philip, where even if you ensure a nice, robust KYC process, sometimes it's not linked to the authentication process for the returning customer. So you create an account, and when you return, you can register another face on another device, and that opens the gates of hell for fraud. So, as Tony mentioned, and Paul as well, with the use of technology and social media and how they can get information, it's very easy to to impersonate someone else. So we're developing technologies that will ensure continuous authentication of the end user, not just at the very beginning. And that's, you know, we've been doing this very successfully. But again, legislation needs to be more cohesive and create proper standards, because if one financial institution does that, they may improve their fraud status, but that will create a lot of friction, and they might not get as many clients as they want. Their conversion rates may go down. So once this is across the board, you're going to have better results, and better results in terms of, you know, for the society. So I think it's about not only technology, it's pivotal, it's important, but I think that the regulators need to act, and act fast.
That's really helpful. So I'm going to bring Tony in, just to, we'd be really interested in your observations around sort of technology, Tony, so that, you know, we have all sorts of new technologies which enable us to, I mean, biometrics is a great example, to drive the creation of documents to a higher standard. But so to just talk a bit about how you see, we're going to go on to the sort of risk side in a moment, but it'd be really interesting to hear what technologies you think are creating sort of real issues and for fraudsters, and helping to sort of basically tackle the problem.
So I guess that, you know, there's some great technology out there on a lot of the banking app stuff that people are using, the liveness scans that Frank just mentioned, some great stuff. So that's when it's configured correctly, yeah, and it's all working in the way, in nice, perfect tandem that it has to be, it's great, yeah. But sometimes a business's drive to onboard allows parts to be missed. So we actually tested these processes a couple of years ago. It was about a year and a half ago now, of where I was able to onboard my face with our CEO of We Fight Fraud, Nicola, with her ID, and then we reversed it and done my ID with her face. And then to cap it all off, I put a bright yellow balaclava on and onboarded with that too. All 3 accounts opened. We was able to put money in all 3 accounts and extract money from all 3 accounts. And that kind of was a really easy process, but all because it hadn't been configured properly, or the liveness check wasn't set up in the right way and actually working in the correct way that it should have been. And everyone's worried about deepfakes. So
what happened with ID now, let me make it clear.
Yeah, it wasn't you guys. No, it's definitely nothing to do. Your stuff is great, because we've, you know, it's good stuff. It's very different, but, and that's the problem, you know, when we start talking about biometrics, you get a whole load of people that start trying to do it, but then the real, you know, you need the stuff that's real you need the right people in the room. That's the thing.
Just a quick one, very important, you know, biometrics, as Tony said, is a little piece, like it's very important, but it's face against face. So
yeah,
you lose your document this morning, I find your document, you don't even know you lost your document. I go to your social media, I get your face, I get like on a nice tablet screen. If you don't have proper liveness, it will go through. Now, yeah, you know, identity vendors, they need to ensure not the same face can be onboarded twice, and not the same document template can be onboarded twice with another face. And most vendors, they don't do that. And it's, you know, there's a lot of laws going on. There's a lot of manual work outside the country, more like affordable countries. And that's part of the problem, I believe. So, you know, you need to know where they are, you know, how can they be, you know, okay, I'm opening a bank account, but, you know, the signal is coming from Nigeria or Ukraine. And that identity, that mobile number is associated with a different identity, with an email that was created 30 minutes ago. So there's a lot more. There's like, you know, you need risk analysis, you need the heavy checks, what we call the doc and the selfie, which comes on their own world. But it needs to be a holistic approach in the collection of data from the very beginning. As soon as they accept the onboarding, even behavioral biometrics, the more, the better, but it needs to be adjusted correctly.
That's a big point, isn't it? So that the kind of framework within which the tech is deployed is really important. So, Paul, what are your observations on the opportunities that tech provides to tackle fraud?
No, I think it is fantastic. Everything the gents have just said there's right. I think I'm probably the most analog of all your panelists. Well, definitely today. And I know this will be shared by the others, but I think I generally go with people. Fraud is about people. And what I was finding, my very last suspect interview, the very last investigation I dealt with, the very last suspect interview I did was with a young lad from Liverpool who was a drug dealer who also was involved in firearms and gangs and things like that, who turned to fraud because it was easy and there was low risk. And what they were doing, they used an online bank, which was fairly new. This is what, 3 years ago, I think, fairly new at the time, the bank. And they just used a neighbour's details. They got a selfie with the neighbour. They got the neighbour's provisional driving licence. And so everything's legitimate. Everything that's going through is legitimate. I mean, obviously, the likes of Frank will probably be able to tell me whether we pick up on the fact that, do we ever pick up on the fact that a number of accounts are being set up in the same geographical area? Because that's a worry. That could be nothing. It could be that the advertisement board is there or someone's word of mouth, but also it could be because somebody's sat right in the middle, getting an awful lot of people, including the genuinely vulnerable people, and taking their identity. So I don't know whether we can look at analytics that way, whether we do that. But as the gents have said, the internet is the biggest enabler, isn't it? And sadly, it's very easy, YouTube or the dark web. If you know what you're looking for, you download the right software. You don't. I think we hang our hat on this cyber criminal, don't we, being quite complex. And I think it doesn't help when, sorry to go off, if you say to a victim of cybercrime, if they don't think they're technically savvy, they're not going to understand it, but they do. But we give it this label, cybercrime. It's just crime. That's it. As we say, 40% of it, 90% of cybercrime. It's just, I think people shy away, and I think that's where Tony was right with the awareness. People shy away when you say cyber, and you say, "Oh, this is done by they downloaded this malware." Oh, what's malware? Well, if you just tell them what it is and educate people simply, we'll get it. But yeah, I think we're moving back to analog fraud to a certain degree as well now. I think we'll be moving back to analog fraud, and unfortunately, the first victims that fraudsters will target are the ones with the identity that they can, quite frankly, steal quite easily.
I think, Tony made that point, both in terms of the tech, but also the individuals. The criminals will target vulnerabilities. They will target
absolutely.
And that, I think it was you, Paul, who made the point about the approach in Liverpool being much more taking into account harm and, moving away from value, because of course, not only is this targeting vulnerable people, but once you've been the victim of crime, it does take an enormous emotional toll. So, we're talking about, I think, two things. One is the kind of creation of identity, but Frank, you also talked about the re-authentication. Once we've created our identity, it's the kind of reuse and re-authentication. So we've got a question from the audience. I do want to encourage the audience now, as we're sort of just over halfway through. If you do have questions for the panel, do send them in. But could you say a little bit more? You kind of talked about the importance of verification, about how you do that continuous verification.
So the KYC process, whereas paramount, very important, not only to be compliant, but to that's the very beginning of the digital journey. It could be in a gambling operator, in a bank, in a fintech. You open the account, you go there, you open the account, you create the KYC. There's a face that was collected there. And usually what happens is that the banks, the institutions, they use Face ID from Apple, from Samsung, from the equipment manufacturer, the mobile manufacturer. And, it can be even friendly fraud. You can open an account and just leave for someone else to operate, which I did back home in Brazil because they don't like international IPs. I bought a new mobile. I said, hey, mom, put your face here. And we need to remember that Face ID is like a password protocol. It's not proper biometrics. Biometrics is comparing template against template. And we can do this continuously with passive liveness. So once you create the identity, why not store it? Why not store that biometric template encrypted locally at the device, so there's no problems at all, nothing can happen. And that very encrypted template can be used later on for payments, for biometric payments, for this, for that, by doing the local comparison, without having to take to the back end. That needs, will take more time. So all of these details, they're very important. Again, when you talk to vendors and they talk document verification, selfie biometrics, yeah, it all sounds sexy and good and oh, cool. Oh, they have the kit. Do they? Go and check, test it, test every technology, create situations, get the document, change the face, because even if you have an amazing KYC process, if it's not linked to the authentication for the returning customer, and usually in the market, what we see is like companies very good at KYC, like us, ID Now, and other companies very good in authentication. But let's bridge this gap. Let's bring these entities together and it create a proper platform approach. Because again, like you cannot be good at everything. We're very good in some parts of the identity. Where we're not, we bring partners to help us out. We don't do data checks with the credit referencing agencies, but we bring other reg tech that enhance the technology. And then you have a holistic approach to identity, which becomes very difficult for fraudsters.
Thanks, Frank. Let me bring Paul in. So we sort of Frank, moved us on to talk about, the creation of identity and verification through KYC. What's your view, Paul, on kind of KYC and its role in preventing fraud?
Well, I think for starters, for those on the call who work in KYC, I absolutely feel your pain because it's such a high, it is such a high risk role. Really, it's a high risk. It's effectively the door to the organization and the way in to anything, whether it's a bank account or, for example, KYC in a application process. We know document fraud is on the rise with regards to recruitment, even down to that. And a lot of local authorities don't have the kind of kit Frank's talking about, sadly, because simply the funds aren't there to do it, and there's a lack of awareness. But no, I think it is. I think by doing something like this, I think this is a type of event really that people need to go to so they're aware of what's out there, but to understand the risks as well. So I think for me, to stop it coming across my desk as a detective and get reported, is the fact that we use the phrase intelligence sharing an awful lot. And it's just quite a grandiose way of saying we do this kind of thing. We send an email when a new system comes out or a new problem comes out, and we effectively share it. And I think that's certainly within law enforcement. That's where some of the problems can be, and for local authorities, certainly within England. There's not enough sharing of the current tactics that are being used to bypass and to circumvent KYC. So for those who don't have the digital KYC software in place, we're down to people. We're down to people again and their awareness. And when I say that's the weak link, I don't mean they are weak. They're just not trained enough. They're just not aware enough of actually how to physically deal with this. So I think the technical side of things is fantastic, but with that must come the awareness and the education for the human element as well. Otherwise, it'll just fall down if it's not implemented.
Yeah, there's a kind of multiplicity of approaches here, isn't it? We're touching on. There's a sort of public awareness. There's the frameworks around which tech is kind of implemented. We talked about biometrics, and then Paul, you just talked about intelligence sharing, and something that UK Finance has been working on is data sharing. So, what data attributes about, for example, a bank account could be shared behind the scenes to help kind of inform the kind of fraud engines that are running with kind of AI to detect kind of transaction anomalies and pick those out and actually sort of identify potentially fraudulent transactions more effectively. Be interested, Tony, in your kind of perspective on kind of KYC processes and their kind of, how effective they are, and
yeah. So we have a different
whether
spin on it.
actually that's what the sort of target areas are for fraudsters in terms of KYC. And we're starting to get quite a few questions in, so I might sort of turn to some of the questions that are coming in.
So we do it differently at We Fight Fraud. We call it Know Your Criminal. So it's very different for us. And it comes back to what Frank said. If you've got the right processes like ID Now in there, yeah, at that stage we're knocked out of the test. We can't get past that bit, yeah. So then we just move on to who ain't got it, yeah. So who's the weakest link in the chain, yeah? Like that's where we're going as criminals, because I'm not interested in going through all them greatest processes until I've got to, yeah. I'll come back to them, but I have to wait years to go through all these other ones that are going to take all this time to catch up, like that's the problem. That it goes back to what Paul said about the fraud squad that have just come together and been pulled together. Perhaps we should have a bit in Parliament of understanding MPs that actually understand what fraud is and the impact that it has on the normal person out there. And those guys should be able to, like that, get the legislation done in order for us to fight back against the fraudsters that are there targeting us and moving around all the red tape whenever they want and going wherever they want. And if we truly want to get in front, that's how we can do it. And then all of the layered approaches of all of them, the ID Nows, the perfect credit check reference agency, all of this stuff has to be implemented. Yeah, the human layer testing is so important. How many people on this call will have, their staff don't even know the secrets that they're giving away? The amount of times I've done a social engineering call to a bank, and what do I need? Oh, you need this, 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 and this. I give them something, and then, sorry, sir, it didn't go through. Why didn't it go through? Oh, you've got a bad reference on our media check that we've done on you. Oh, next time we'll just pick a clear one, thanks. And that's it. Like the secrets that you're giving away, we don't even realize, and so it's always until we get these problems sorted out, we've got loads of issues to go through,
Another important point, sorry to jump in, just to add to what Tony says, Tony said, it's like this, in the savannah, you don't need to run faster than the lion. You need to run a bit faster than the gazelles around you, because they will get caught. So it's like financial institutions, you're never going to get like a perfect KYC that you're going to let all the good guys in and all the bad guys out. But if you do it properly, if you do it better than your competition, fraud will go to them and not stick to you, because they will exploit everyone. They will check everyone. Once they see it's a bit easier, they will stick to it, and another very important thing that we haven't talked about is the human element within the KYC process. Again, even in the UK, imagine documents are very easy to defraud, and some vendors I see, they say, oh, we're doing 100% automated with 99% of document check capable. I said, this is a lie. This is impossible, because we do not control the front end, nor do our clients. What if the camera is a bit scratchy, the light condition not very good, that very old document? You're not going to be doing via software. So you need to have an adjudication team manually checking documents. Now, check your vendor, because most of them take these images outside the country. It's not GDPR compliant. It goes to Asia, it goes to Vietnam, India, where it's more affordable. Like ID Now, we have a certified identity center, all those people, they are certified. That's why the European Investment Bank decided to invest in us. That's why we're part of the European Commission. So we go more from regulation to technology and identity, rather than just selling identity modules. But again, it's not an easy thing. It's a balancing act. When there's credit involved, we need to be very stringent and pay a lot of attention. When it's like, for example, money remittance, our clients are not putting their own money, you can be a bit more, I would say, focused on conversion than anti-fraud. It depends a lot. Every type of implementation, there's an objective. So we need to pay attention to that.
Thanks, Frank. Look, we're really getting great engagement from the audience. So and we've got 13 minutes. So let's sort of see if we can address some of the questions that are coming in. So we've had a question about, you know, the greatest areas of weakness, and I think we've just been addressing that, and the importance actually of pace in our response, you know, from, you know, legislators, authorities. We need to be agile, fleet of foot. We would really agree with that. And there are some areas of policy, for example, on digital identity, where we're really encouraging governments set out their roadmap to make these things happen. You know, once we pass the law, but we need to sort of really drive the implementation. But a question for Paul, in terms of the, we touched on this, didn't we, in terms of informing Parliament about fraud and fraudsters and the risks. But, you know, how do we get those sort of fraud champions at the most senior level, particularly within policing? And, you know, a challenge actually around the kind of prioritization of fraud as a route to promotion within authorities. I mean, which I found quite counterintuitive, because I think, well, financial crime, anti-fraud, it's the most technically challenging, sophisticated area of fraud, biggest level of issue for crime. You think it would be a fast track to promotion, but what are your thoughts on that?
And guess who's written that? Quite not the person, but can guess what sector they come from. They've written that, because it's kind of question absolutely. I'd ask myself, really. Certainly within policing, it's very difficult. Yes, practically speaking, fraud is not it goes down as a priority, obviously, because it's harm. But as in policing priorities, what you're going to put your, for example, in Merseyside recently, we've had some horrific shootings, horrific murders. And when those kind of murders happen, we would go and assist the fraud team, because we're detectives for first and foremost, so we get pulled away from frauds and go and deal with them. Now that's understandable. I can obviously it is terrorism incidents, things like that. It sounds like a corny cliche, but changing the narrative is horrific. That phrase, changing the narrative, we're not going to do it in policing for a while, because I think Frank turned up at fraud isn't the sexy sort of quick hit that a lot of people like. With firearms, we usually get a lot of arrests straight after it. With drugs, we get a lot of arrests and it's in the news. I can investigate something for 3 years, get one arrest. It could be for millions and millions of pounds. But again, fraud isn't seen. I think for policing, I think what was important, and they've done in a lot of police forces, is they brought in what we call financial abuse safeguarding officers, FASOs, which are police officers or police staff suitably trained and experienced, who work with victims and work with banks to try and recover funds. And that's always a big way of getting a good bit of news. You know, we've got a good news story, even though we haven't managed to. But again, that relies on the cooperation of the banks as well. But purely from me, I think the closer we work with the likes of our vulnerable persons unit as well, we'll get traction in the police. Because you look at romance fraud, other than the physical act of intimacy, is absolutely a domestic abuse. It fits the criteria perfectly. Emotionally damaged, the financial abuse. And I think if we start working with the likes of our domestic abuse and try and educate on how we can manage romance fraud victims better, I think that's an easy win for the police as well, to try and promote that. But yeah, it's not seen as a route to promotion, because fraud's boring compared to dealing with firearms and drugs and terrorism. Sadly, that's the way it is.
But I think
so sorry to sound a little cynical again, but yeah, I'd start promoting the harm elements to try and catch some attention, and certainly advertise the wins of getting people's money back, making sure that gets out there to people.
Yeah, and you've made that the point about the interconnections between different forms of crime. You know, these crimes don't necessarily take place in kind of isolation. They're very much kind of linked to other crimes. So I'm going to go quite quick fire now. So Tony, question for you. It says, how can fraud differ amongst different industries? So that's not something we've touched on, but you know, banking, gaming, estate agency. You know, are there particular industries that you know fraudsters are targeted? I guess, you know, payments and banking is just such an obvious one, because that's where we hold our value. But
Well, it's where they cash out. You
Yeah.
know, like if you're the criminal, you need to cash out, right? So the banks are always going to be involved in it. So even if I've got an estate agent and I've got a dodgy surveyor and I've got a dodgy solicitor and I can draw down dodgy funds into an account that the solicitor controls, who is going to send to the bank account, right? So the bank account's always the exit, whether I'm trying to buy a coat online for £2,000, whatever it may be, that's always the exit. So hence why we've always been so big on money muling and made it our topic to raise the subject massively on, because it's a big thing. But, you know, we have problems. We don't even have a law here in the UK of identity theft. It's all segmented into different charges. Yeah. So if I'm a criminal, I'm sitting down, I'm negotiating. What's going on? Paul, tell me, like, I don't want that one. I don't want that one. I'll take that one and that one, but I'm not taking them. Yeah, like, so we can't, it's the law against itself again. Yeah. And like Paul says, it all breaks down into romancing fraud, which is, we're not going to see romancing fraud victims until they become victims, because at that point they're in love. They're not even going to become a victim. They don't even realize that this stuff's happening to them. And we call them pig butchered. Like, what do we expect them to do? Like, we've got to start waking up to what the actual public think of this stuff if we really want to understand the problems. So.
Absolutely. So I'm going kind of quick fire now. So Frank, your turn. So more collaboration amongst vendors to, you know, bring together kind of identity data. Well, you know, that's an interesting thought, isn't it? I mean, there are laws actually that prevent market participants collaborating. So we have competition law, but how within the boundaries of kind of competition law do you see sort of collaboration? I mean, actually, this is an example, you know, UK Finance as a trade body brings together market participants to collaborate at an industry level, but how do you see sort of collaboration with your competitors to prevent fraud?
Well, again, it's down on legislation, and this is further afield than we can imagine, because that's going to involve the sharing of personal data. And I see it happening so easily and so quickly. Now, when we talk about reusable identities, the digital identity conversation, you know, for example, the eIDAS 2.0, you're going to bring issuers and verifiers under the same umbrella, if you like, under the same wallet. So there will be some standards for sharing for, you know, because banks, they will become, for example, identity issuers and also verifiers. So that can involve some collaboration. But so far, unfortunately, we cannot go and share with our competitors, say, look, be careful, you know, and get that intel back. You know, we do work, we create platforms, but there's still, how can I say, not a lone wolf, because we work with a lot of partners. But I mean, we cannot share data, and I think it's going to be down to the standards that the legislation creates down the line. Once we talk about reusable identity, that's way closer than in the fragmented market where every country has their own regulation and every financial institution do their own KYC.
I think that, I mean, that's a big point, isn't it? So we have a great opportunity with the Data Protection Digital Information Bill, with the Digital Identity and Attributes Trust Framework, with the certification of providers, with actually a kind of new ecosystem in the UK. I mean, it has existed, but it's been brought together with certification, the new regulator, which kind of sits in government at the moment, the Office for Digital Identity and Trust. So there are going to be kind of opportunities, and actually sort of technical opportunities in the application of the trust schemes for digital identity to share information, particularly where someone has tried to create a fraudulent ID. Now, we talked a bit about intelligence sharing. We've had a question about that. I'm afraid these acronyms don't mean very much to me, not being an economic crime person, but CIRA, CIFAS, Hunter. Paul, are they doing enough to encourage intelligence sharing?
Yeah, they're trying to encourage it, because I mean, specifically the likes of CIFAS, which do an awful lot, and CIFAS do an awful lot in the local authorities as well, because sadly, remember that when we're talking about repeat victims, we'll probably have, when we talk about repeat victims that generally are going to have some sense of vulnerability, whether it's technology or whether it's personal vulnerability. So a lot of things goes through local authorities because they speak to their carers, they speak to the families, and so that they are doing. I think intelligence sharing in general, I think it's difficult because within policing, we have the College of Policing, and you would get some good practice, guys. The law changed or some new tactics came up. The College of Policing would generally put it together to a certain degree. I'll say there was issues as well because of the amount, and send it out to police forces so we could try and educate ourselves on it. There's not enough of that. I can only speak for local authorities, having just come from one. There's not, that just doesn't happen in local authority. I don't think there's a sense, as it goes back to, it's great having all these law enforcement squads and all these different departments within central government, but have we got one college of knowledge? Have we got one knowledge hub that people can use? So we should, this mystical intelligence sharing, it just comes down to making sure someone can send an email out to a big team of people. But yes, I think it's just difficult. It's just difficult. There's so much fraud. As Frank and Tony have said, the amount of tactics that can be used, we don't even know half of them, I can imagine. Terrific. So it's difficult. But I think as long as we're doing something, I think we are. And I think the likes of Cyphers are. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough, isn't it?
It is tough. Now, we could keep going for a lot longer, but we're nearly timed out, and it has been really fascinating. So, thank you for your contribution. I do want to sort of just, we've got a minute or two, so I just wanted to ask each of you a question. So I'm going to put you on the spot because this isn't sort of a scripted question, but to end on a positive note, each of you, what do you think is that, the most positive opportunity that we now have to tackle fraud more effectively? We have seen, as I started the webinar, with the numbers going down a little, but Tony, where's the sort of real opportunity to take positive action, just in a sort of soundbite?
I think awareness and understanding to the general public will serve us all well.
That's brilliant. Great plug for Take 5. We need more, we need Take 5, and we need that kind of awareness. So, Paul, I'll come to you next. You have to suspend the cynicism, Paul.
Yeah, no.
Upbeat, no.
People must think that. No, absolutely not. No, there's hugely positive things going on. I have to echo Tony's. All these programs are on at 10, now, 9:30 and 10:30 in the morning about fraud, moving to 6, 7 o'clock at night mainstream. That's how we'll get people to know about fraud.
Educate the public to protect themselves.
Oh.
Yeah. Frank, right? So, final note. Thank you for sponsoring the webinar, by the way. We've had kind of 2 votes for awareness. I'll take it that you will also vote for that. But what else, on a positive note, can we look forward to tackling fraud more effectively in the year ahead, in 2024, 2025?
First of all, to choose a certified identity provider, that's first and foremost.
Yeah.
Again, we need to do some more lobbying. I think the population, we need to push the MPs, the legislation to come up with frameworks, more standards, and that will help society. But again, you need to do your due diligence when choosing your partner.
Thank you, Frank. Great note to end on. Thanks. Great discussion. We're just a minute over. Thank you very much to those who joined, participated in the poll, and also to those who are sort of listening to this through our kind of webinar library. And with that, I'll close the webinar. Thank you very much, and have a good day, everyone.
Yes.